The Icebound Command, Part 1. From the cycle, The Northern Wars, Winter, 1807. The sea wore the storm like a cloak, a grey upon grey that seemed to fall from the sky and rise from the water in equal measure. Snow without softness came in slanted sheets, stinging any skin foolish enough to face it. The wind clipped its orders across the rigging, taut and cold as wire, and out of that weather, like a thought grown hard and wooden, HMS Valiant shouldered forward under close-reefed topsails, her hull dark with ice, her decks chalked with hoarfrost, her guns mute and interior as a clenched jaw. Lieutenant Samuel Harcourt had the deck. He stood with both hands locked behind his back, gloves stiffened by the cold to the shape of resolve. The quartermaster peered under his hood to the compass, which sulked and quivered as if even magnetism had misgivings about the north. The helm creaked, spoke, creaked again. A boy, midshipman Collier, cheeks bitten red, eyes bright with that dangerous happiness the very young take in peril, shouted a bearing to the forecastle, and was swallowed by the white. "Mr. Harcourt," said a voice to his right. The ship's surgeon, Dr. Nathaniel Wren, had his coat tight at the throat, a woolen scarf wound as neatly as a bandage. His spectacles were filmed with snow. He wiped them with his thumb. "If you continue standing still, you'll freeze in that pose and become the ship's newest figurehead." "Better that than a cautionary tale," Harcourt said, smiling without warmth. He was thinking, as he always did in weather like this, of weight and strain, canvas hard as slate, masts groaning like old trees, the fitful bite of the rudder into seas that rose and sank with no pattern but their own. To command here was to negotiate with a god that refused to parley. From the companionway came Captain Elias Godwin, tall even when the ship dipped beneath him, a sardonic figure in a tarred hat and greatcoat. His face was handsome, in a manner that could be mistaken for kindness, the nose straight, the mouth decisive. Only the eyes betrayed him, pale, alert, forever scoring the horizon as if it were a ledger he meant to balance. He had been elegant once. The Arctic made elegance absurd, so it persisted in him as ferocity. "Mr. Harcourt," he said, voice level despite the wind, "you will keep her north by east a half." "Aye, sir, north by east a half," Harcourt replied, repeating the words to the quartermaster, who laid the ship to it like a promise. "Doctor," Godwin added, "I hope you are taking notes. Nature is giving us a lecture in endurance." "Nature lectures," Wren said, calm, "and then tests without mercy." Godwin's mouth moved but did not become a laugh. He looked aloft. "Shorten another reef. I won't have her mastheads yanked off by a petulant gust." Hands went to the rigging. Men turned to black knots against white, inching along shrouds and foot ropes, cursing in practiced undertones. The storm soared at the sails. The sails answered sullenly. Harcourt felt the ship ease, heel, then settle. The great, careful animal underfoot obeyed, though not with pleasure. Below the wind, below the slap and roar, a more intimate sound. Ice working in the seams, ice forming on the braces and stays, ice fattening until a block came down with a pistol-shot crack. "Send 2 men with mauls to the forecastle rails," Harcourt said. "Break that accursed armor. I'll not have her carrying an extra ton at the bows." Collier darted. "Aye, sir." He sprang to the task with a zeal Harcourt might, on a gentler day, have admired. Today it struck him as showy. There was something in the boy's manner, sharp, watchful, that read as ambition unseasoned by fear. From the starboard bow, the lookout's voice arrived through the weather, as if dragged by it. "Ice ahead, field ice, broad as the world." The Valiant crept towards it. Through the gauze of snow, the sea seemed to have put on armor, plates and floes, and heaped fragments in a landless plain. Dark leads ran like cracks in a kiln, vanishing as quickly as they opened. Screeched and sang the ice, a chorus of glass. Godwin's eyes lit. "We are in their country now," he said, almost to himself. Harcourt thought he meant the French. He knew better than to say so. They hove to for an hour, then another. Men chipped, swore, mended a parted brace, heaved a green hand below with frostbitten fingers. Wren's surgery smelled of vinegar and damp wool. He worked without hurry and without sentiment. Harcourt carried orders, made small decisions, and loaded without complaint the significant ones onto Captain Godwin's shoulders. It was a long time since Samuel had believed heroes were anatomically different from the rest of them. The difference was habit. Heroes were those who took responsibility into the blood until the blood knew no other work. After dark, the storm tired of itself. It slacked in resentment. The snow strained to mist, then drifted. The wind walked backward, then stood panting. The sea, obedient only to its own considerations, resumed its perpetual argument with the ice. From the forecastle, a call, "Light to leeward!" Harcourt went forward, Godwin at his shoulder, Wren a pace behind. Through a ragged aperture of weather he saw it, a far, pale bloom, uncertain but stubborn. Not a star, not the reflection of any natural thing. A ship's lantern, hooded and unhooded to make a signal. Once, twice, thrice, then a pause, thrice again. Godwin's breath made a ghost that immediately fled his mouth. "French?" Harcourt said. "It could be any nation, sir." "Not any," Godwin said with a faint smile. "That code belonged to a certain Corsican's fleet before he taught Europe new habits. LaRoche uses it to insult me. He is sending me a note that says, 'Come and be ashamed again.'" Wren's eyes had gone to the light with a different hunger. "There's another lamp, lower, a boat perhaps, or a hazard." Godwin stood very still. "Ready the long gun. We will answer his note with a punctuation mark." It was a beautiful, terrible thing, the 24-pounder that lay as a guest in the Valiant's bow, a single weapon with the personality of a mastiff. Men ran cold fingers over the tackle, set the quoin, measured powder with a lover's thrift. Harcourt himself sighted along the barrel. The world narrowed to windage and fall. The light winked in and out as weather had whims. "On the next showing," Godwin said softly. They waited. The sea moved its shoulders. The ship spoke, wood to rope, rope to wood. Harcourt felt the tick of his heart. He counted, because counting is a liturgy, and men must have liturgies in weather. The light came again. Harcourt fired. Sound fell outward and came back changed. The ball went into the mist with an indifference that made Harcourt momentarily despise it. Then, distant, a bark, a fragment. An answer, not of signal, but of lead. A shot shrieked high and a spray of splinters jumped from the bulwark like wooden birds. So, not a wreck, not a fishing craft come astray. A man of war with teeth. Godwin's mouth made a line. "So we commence," he said. "Beat to quarters." The drum spoke with its hard, irresistible logic. Men moved as if their bodies wrote the orders. Guns' crews went to their stations. Powder monkeys set hands to leather buckets, with the care of priests handling chalices. Officers, Harcourt among them, walked the gun decks and spoke in precise, almost bookish voices that settled nerves like warm bread. "Mr. Harcourt," Godwin said, "take the larboard battery. We will not waste shot on the weather. We will make the weather ours." "Aye, sir." Snow fled, regrouped, returned. The French, if French they were, kept their lamps hooded now. Smart, vexing. The Valiant crept and tested the ice like a blind man feeling for a doorstep. Harcourt thought, not for the first time, that the North was a different sort of enemy, not malevolent, which is at least negotiable, but uninterested. The storm was a public performance of that indifference. The ice, its signature. When the enemy finally revealed himself for the whole vessel felt like a personality. The sight was almost kind. A frigate not bigger than the Valiant, but quicker in stays and rakish in her lines. She wore a handkerchief of tricolour at the taffrail, as if it were a joke. Across the ice-flecked dark, her name came faintly, Fury. Behind her, two smaller silhouettes, corvettes with ambitions. A small fleet, yes, a thorn with two supplicants. "Commodore LaRoche, courteously close," Godwin said, somehow approving and loathing at once. He could have run and called it prudence. Instead, he invites the dance. "They may be testing the ice for us, sir," Harcourt said, "or driving us toward it." Godwin looked at him mildly. "Yes," he said, and then, "I know his mind. He would rather hurt his ship than spare his pride. He and I are brethren in that vice." Wren's scarf had sprouted hoar-frost stalactites. "Refuse the lure, then." "No," Godwin said. "We must be saints and sinners in equal measure. Mr. Harcourt, close on his larboard quarter. I'll not fire a broadside into the dark and call that courage. We will see him." So they went, cats across a mantelpiece. The ice opened a tongue of water. Both ships slid into it like figures on a card. Harcourt felt the ship stiffen. The gun crews tensed. The drums ceased to be loud and became merely true. The first exchange was else than glorious. A ragged cough of guns from the Fury, a reply from Valiant that bit low and chewed water. Splinters were the only casualties. Splinters have made widowers. A sailor named Pike was carried below with 3 of them, in his face and 1 in his eye. Wren bent over him and worked with gentle profanity. LaRoche had no interest, it seemed, in a gentleman's broadside duel. He came obliquely, worrying at the Valiant like a dog at a boot. His corvettes worried too. Little pricks, nettling, unhandsome. Harcourt found himself, admiring the indecency. War is indecent. Decency is the luxury of peace. They fought for 2 hours, and for 60 years. The night opened and closed its eye. Ice moved. The sea stipulated. Harcourt saw one of the corvettes, name obscured, glide too boldly into a raft of brash and halt like a pin struck into wax. Seizing the moment, he bellowed for the forward carronade. 2 grape shots later, the little ship's deck was littered clean. She did not sink. Ice is a reluctant killer that prefers to hold and break, but she screamed in her joints and went quiet. The other corvette kept her distance thereafter. "Good," Godwin said, emotionless as arithmetic. "We dismember him." "Sir," Harcourt said, "the ice is moving west. If we keep this tack, we'll be pressed." "That is his hope," Godwin said, eyes almost tender toward his enemy. "We will disappoint him by giving him what he thinks he wants." Harcourt understood, and disliked that he understood. He took orders and issued them. The ship, with humanity's usual dangerous intelligence, obeyed. They let the ice narrow their path until it became a corridor with violence on both sides. It was like fencing in a stairwell. "Now," Godwin said, and the larboard guns roared in a chorus that would have been a hymn had it motored toward mercy. The fury took it full. Men down, pumps screaming, a topmast riven, and let fall. The French answered. The Valiant's main yard smashed and came down in an obstinate tangle. The 2 ships, idiots, lovers, were close enough to trade insults if anyone had breath for it. They traded iron instead, as nations do when pride says, "Speak up." At the height of it, as powder smoke turned the snow a pale sulphur, Harcourt felt a tug at his sleeve. Collier, wild-eyed, hair rimed, shouted into his ear, "Sir, the lockers! We've a shortage. Powder went missing. A dozen charges." Harcourt's brain, full of arithmetic already, added treachery and got an answer that burned. "What?" Collier, quick as a bird. "I swear to you, sir, it wasn't negligence. They were taken. I saw—" His mouth worked. "Saw Finch from the purser's gang with a bag. He ran to the longboat. He dash. A shot went overhead that made speech obsolete. Finch, the name meant appetite and excuses. Harcourt had him flogged for theft once and reprieved him under Wren's intervening eye. Mercy is an investment that does not always pay dividends. "Find Finch," Harcourt said. "Bring him to the captain, warm or cold." Collier vanished with the efficiency of a thought one has too often. Wren appeared in his place with blood on his fingers that was not his. 2 dead, 1 dying, and something wrong in powder. "I know," Harcourt said. He watched Godwin, who watched LaRoche, who watched Godwin. In men of this stripe, attention was a weapon. A cry from aft. Men hauling someone. Curses. A fist. Collier reappeared with Finch between 2 Marines, one of whom had blood on his cheek where Finch's ring had left a friendly message. Godwin did not waste his gaze on anyone who did not deserve it. He allowed Finch into his eyes reluctantly, as if granting him a last sacrament. "Your explanation," the captain said, "and take care, for I find I am not well disposed towards sin." Finch smiled with his bad teeth. "If I had the gift of words, sir, I'd spend it on my soul. As it is, I'll give you this. The French pay in gold we never see. I took enough to make a hole or 2 in their plans." "Powder holes in our plans?" Harcourt snapped. Finch shrugged. "Ships drift. Alliances also. Who will remember my name when I am frozen white as your decks?" Wren's face was not often angry. It was now. "We will, because we will hang you," he said, flat and almost bored, which is the tone that convinces men that a thing will certainly occur. Godwin made a small motion with his hand. The Marines let Finch bend his head toward the justice he had earned. The captain looked down the lane of ice to where LaRoche's ship was trying like a wounded predator to come again. "Later," he said. Harcourt knew it was not mercy, it was arithmetic. "Put him in irons." Finch struggled like a netted eel and found no purchase. He swore to the French hoarsely, with an accent he had earned somewhere un-English. Harcourt felt a small, simple grief. Betrayal always took him by surprise, which was his unprofessional fault. They fought until the Fury tried one last gambit. She came across the Valiant's bows to rake them, a gentleman's trick from a knife fighter, and the Valiant obliged with a chain shot that took the Frenchman's foremast out as neatly as a sketch erases a line. The mast went like an old oath. LaRoche's ship yawed and nearly kissed the ice with her stern. She had enough of a tongue of water under her to limp. Godwin's eyes shone with a satisfaction that did not make him younger. "Pursue," he said. "Sir," Harcourt began. He did not finish. Captain Godwin's face did a thing it rarely did. It betrayed itself. Something in him, the part that remembered shame as if it were a lover, called to him to right an old wrong. It was a brave thing and an unwise one. "Pursue," Godwin repeated softly, like a prayer to a saint who does not take petitions. They went. The ice let them, then considered changing its mind. The corvette, still free, tried a last, imprecise raking. Valiant's aftmost carronade barked an objection. The little Frenchman fell off, embarrassed. LaRoche made a desperate decision. He went to the eastward tongue of a lead that almost did not exist. Valiant followed into that twilight stairwell. There is a moment in a man's life when he knows, though he walks forward, that he has already stepped beyond the last safe stone. Harcourt felt it as certainly as a nail underfoot, not panic but a cool clarity like gin in winter. They ran aground on moving ground, not a shoal, but a heave of ice that lifted like a whale under the bow. The ship's timbers made a sound like judgment spoken in an amphitheater. Men went to their knees without praying. The Fury, close ahead, did the same, arrested by the sea's obstinate sideways thinking. For a minute, maybe three, the two ships were held like toys. "Backer!" Godwin shouted. "Kedging anchors!" Mr. Harcourt. But Harcourt was already at it, his mouth issuing orders. His mind did not have time to pre-approve. Boats went out with anchors like iron flowers. Men heaved, sang, swore, panted. The pumps took up a drumbeat. Wren's quiet drudge of medicine turned into an organ. Finch in irons laughed, and then stopped as a marine's buttstock found the place his laughter lived. They clawed free, the Fury too by devilry. The two ships drifted with dignity back into a pool of water, as if the sea had allowed them to save face. They were both mauled, spars rigging, men, pride, nothing unhurt. Godwin, still with that quiet hunger in his eyes, made a small bow to his adversary, as if both of them were wearing clean coats. LaRoche, whose face Harcourt could not see but could imagine, dipped his torn colors just enough to be insolent. Then both captains did the same unheroic, very human calculation and came to the same conclusion. Live now, fight later. They separated in the storm's slow-breathing light, the French east into a fog that made them a half-memory, the Valiant west into a sea that could not forgive because it did not condemn. From the private log of Lieutenant Samuel Harcourt, latitude uncertain, the compass is fatigued. December 2nd, 1807. We have fought LaRoche again, and did not disgrace ourselves. We neither took him, nor lost ourselves in the attempt. Captain Godwin had the enemy by the virtue of obsession. Had the ice not inserted its opinion, he might have made himself a legend. Perhaps he has already. I find that what men say of a battle depends on who survived to tell it. We took damage that will require more than oakum and prayer. Dr. Wren worked his quiet miracles. We lost Pike, Jenner, and O'Malley. We maimed half a dozen who will learn the weather's names each time it turns cold. Mr. Finch is in irons and will be hung as a social ornament when protestations of mercy have been performed. The captain is cold as the sea, and then too warm. He suffers from LaRoche, as one suffers a fever. I cannot say if I respect him more for his compulsion or less. What I respect is that he knows it and chooses it. There is a difference between a man driven and a man who drives himself. Letter never sent. To one whose name I will not write, because to write it is to make it more real than I can stand. The North has a way of stilling the heart while exciting the mind. I feel brilliant and exhausted all the time. I cannot tell if I am making good decisions or merely decisions. You would tell me it is the same. You were kind in this way. You made my distinctions fewer, and therefore my life larger. I cannot write you honestly that I am not afraid. I can only write that fear seems a reasonable reaction to what one must do when in charge of other people's breathing. If I should return, I will have learned to speak less and to listen more, to the ship, to the wind, and perhaps to you. For now I listen for a Frenchman's pride and my captain's heartbeat. Both are loud. S.H. They made such sail as they dared. The storm returned at intervals to lean a shoulder into them. The men fell into that rhythm of repair that is as much a ship's life as departure or arrival. They spliced and thrust and braced and hammered. Wren went from bunk to bunk like a ghost without malice. Collier darted everywhere, sometimes to effect and sometimes to be seen, and Harcourt made a note of that because he has learned that bright boys leave shadows. On the second day, as a poor light attempted daylight and retreated, the master came with a report that chilled and warmed in the same breath. The powder manifest would not tally. 18 charges unaccounted for, beyond the 12 Finch had been found with. The numbers were not merely wrong, they were willed wrong. Harcourt did a thing he disliked more than violence. He went among the men with a soft voice. He asked questions worth less than the answers, and listened for what was not said. He found gradually not malice, but pattern. It lay around Collier like frost, a kindness here, a warning there, an eagerness to be thought loyal that only newly guilty men exhibit. He found Collier near the manger board, working a knot as if it were a problem in Euclid. "Mr. Collier," Harcourt said lightly, "your hands are redder than your cheeks." "So, sir?" It is the habit of an honest man to keep his hands busy. But you are busier than necessity. Shall we speak? Collier's pride, a clever creature, took control of his face. If I have failed in any... You have failed at invisibility, Harcourt said, which is difficult for the ambitious. Tell me what Finch promised you. Collier met his eyes like a challenge. Harcourt saw in him the reflex to lie, shaped like a wave and then restrained. That decided him. He did not want to kill the boy. He wanted to keep him. He said the French prize money would be rich enough to make a man, Collier said, too quick. He said, he faltered and then finished, defiant. He said the captain would get us killed for his revenge and that you were too in love with him to stop it. Harcourt felt his face do nothing. Inside him, a room filled with a thoughtful, cold light. He said, "And you?" "I thought," Collier said, "what if the war is a ladder and not a wall? What if I climb?" "And you step on whom?" Harcourt asked, almost kindly. "On men with wives who write to them? On boys who have not yet decided whether to be good?" Collier flushed even through the cold. "You have the luxury," he said bitterly, "of honor. Some of us are forced to invest in luck." Harcourt had no answer to that would be true and useful. "You will come to the captain with me," he said. "You will say exactly as much as you have said, and perhaps the rope will be used more for rigging than for theatre." Collier's throat moved. A boy again. "And if I do not?" "Then you will go to the captain with the Marines," Harcourt said without ornament. Collier looked at his hands. "Sir," he whispered, "I don't want to die." "Nor I," Harcourt said. "That is the starting place of all the plans I approve." They went to Godwin. The captain received them in his cabin, which smelled of lamp oil and iron, and something like cologne that had remembered better days. Charts were spread, their corners held by bullets. Outside, the sea roared its generalities. Inside, a clock tick attempted to make 1 minute resemble another. Collier spoke, to his credit, without embroidery. Godwin listened long, looking not at the boy, but at one small tear in the chart, where someone's impatient finger had pushed too hard. When Collier finished, Godwin stood and came to him and put his hand, not gently, not harshly, on the back of his neck. "You will live," he said. Collier made a noise like a man discovering he could breathe. "You will live," Godwin repeated, "and you will spend that currency with care. You will also eat your betrayal raw every morning to remind yourself what it tastes like. Do you understand me?" Collier nodded so hard his hat fell off and seemed grateful to be less official. "Finch?" Harcourt asked. "Finch will hang," Godwin said with no pride and no pleasure. "We must speculate with an example to hand." Wren, who had come quietly, said, "Captain." Godwin's eyes moved to him. "Doctor, it is arithmetical. We are a society. Societies require theatre." Wren's spectacles minted 2 little moons of reflection. "Even so, I recommend a smaller audience. There is no appetite for excess on a cold stomach." Godwin inclined his head, which for him was tenderness. They hanged Finch next morning on a makeshift gallows that looked embarrassed at its purpose. The men watched without cheering. Harcourt watched with the detached sorrow of a man who knows he will see this again. Collier watched as if learning a language. Finch died quickly. It is important in this kind of tale to say so when it is true. The weather lifted in that treacherous way the Arctic has, which is more philosophy than meteorology. The sky was a bruised blue. The horizon achieved that impossible clarity which makes far things absurdly near. The ice opened, closed, opened again, like a thinking mouth. In that brief clarity, the masthead sighted not joyfully a wedge of sails to the northeast. "French," the lookout called down, almost apologetic. "Not a single," said Godwin, naked delight in his voice now. "He has gathered his children." La petite escadre de LaRoche. Harcourt lifted the glass. The Fury had grafted some new dignity by replacing what she could. The corvette that had escaped showed wounds. And behind them, a third ship. Not large, but stout. It flew not the tricolour, but a pennant that suggested a neutrality more in love with Napoleon than with law. A prize, perhaps, or a collaborator. History has many words for those who fear to be left alone. "They are making for that field ice," Harcourt said. "A table of it. Bold or foolish," Wren said. "Or both," Godwin said, which was the closer truth. They followed. Battle reopens very much as it closes, with the wind taking sides without admitting it. The second engagement was a study in patience and contempt. The ice floes formed lanes, roundabouts, dead ends. The French danced with a memory of yesterday's pain. The British pursued with a memory of yesterday's restraint. Harcourt's mind was a slate with too many chalk marks on it. He erased and wrote and erased. They traded at range first, long guns measuring opinion. Then a fog rose from the ice as if the sea were thinking out loud, and getting very tired of it. In it, they closed to pistol shot. Harcourt found himself on the main deck surrounded by smoke that smelt of 1,000 burnt Sundays. Men shouted and grinned and bled. A young seaman named Merritt laughed as if at a joke only he could hear. Then a ball arranged his jaw to be quiet forever. Wren knelt by him long after the use was past. The ship trembled, as if determined not to fall. LaRoche's new ally proved to be a Baltic trader, rig altered, guns strapped improvised on her deck like teeth knocked into a jaw that did not want them. She moved badly and fought worse, which can be dangerous. Harcourt ordered the starboard bow chaser to give her something to consider. It did, and she reconsidered, turning away in a sulk. It was the fury they wanted, and the fury wanted them. Twice she tried to turn their bows. Twice Harcourt's battery denied her. The third time she came within 20 yards, and for an instant Harcourt saw across that short water the face of a man he had never met, and yet knew, as one knows, a rival in a story told by a friend. LaRoche was unhandsome, which is to say real. His eyes were the color of old pewter, and as reflective. He smiled. How could he smile? And lifted a hand to his hat and touched the brim, not mockery, but complicated acknowledgement. Then the ships slid away from one another, as if embarrassed by intimacy. And still the ice pressed. The North had grown bored with its own carnival and wished to tidy away its toys. Floes gathered like old men to a fire. The channel narrowed and the wind went contrary, in love with nobody now. "Signal the corvette to our larboard to wear ship," Godwin said. "He can't hold that line and keep his masts." The signal was made. The corvette, perhaps unable, perhaps unwilling, attempted the impossible and did not achieve it. She fetched up hard and screamed once, a building groan that went up through the registers. Men leapt. Some did not leap far enough. The ice took them ungently. Wren stood on the rail and shouted at nothing that could help. Harcourt felt the future arrive. There would be inquiry and accounting and blame. He assumed more of it than was his share and did not complain. That was his trade. The battle ended as men do not like battles to end, not with triumph or catastrophe, but with both sides exhausted and the world shrugging. The Fury limped with her head high, her signals few and tight. The Valiant sagged in her middle like a boxer who had discovered his ribs. The third French ship had decided commerce was a more promising art than war, and took herself away with that peculiar dignity cowards can manage in fog. The ice pushed the ships apart, as if bored with them. The wind, inconstant but decisive, changed its mind and made a friend of nobody. Godwin stood at the taffrail and watched the place where LaRoche had been until watching had no object. Wren came and stood with him, and then Harcourt, who did not much like standing still, but found himself compelled. "We will meet him again," Godwin said with the serenity of a man prophesying a thing he can help make true. Wren said nothing. Harcourt said, "Yes, sir," and meant something more complicated. From the private log of Lieutenant Samuel Harcourt, ice latitude, ice longitude, December 9th, 1807. The second engagement ended not with victory, but with a lesson. We are not dead, which is a kind of success for which one cannot write a song. The captain is himself and not himself. I have seen him gentler with a bruised spar than with a wounded man. And then, half an hour later, I saw him sit by a sailor named Merritt, whose jaw Wren could not fix, and stroke his hair like a father. Perhaps revenge and compassion are not opposites in him, but twins who quarrel about the order of precedence. Mr. Collier has been, there is no other word, rehabilitated. He goes where I send him and does not add embellishment. He has learned some aspect of humility, which is not the same thing as humiliation. I will invest in him and accept that some investments fail. I dream of a warm room and four walls as stubborn as oak. I wake to oak that is grudgingly warmer for the blood in it, and feel less cheated than you would think. We make slower water to the west for repairs we can achieve, and for the message that must go south. The French are testing the north, and we have tested them. Letter never sent. To the same unnamed recipient, whom the sea keeps from me with a possessive hand. I would have you see these colors, the blue that is not gentle, the white that is not pure. The ice has a voice you could write sadder songs to. There is a bird that lives here, small, brown in summer, white now, that appears on our rail as if to mock us, and then vanishes without taking sides. I thought once that the world must love or hate us to be this beautiful or this cruel. I find that the world, like a certain sort of judge, is only very interested in facts. We must supply our own meaning. I choose loyalty as a meaning, and then have to decide the order in which to apply it. To captains, to causes, to men, to you. Repair is a narrative, if done in good faith. They made camp of their ship. Sails went to the palm. Splinters became stories. The men muttered. Some muttering became laughter. Some remained muttering. Wren visited them in their huddled worlds and said things that did not solve pain but made it make sense. And sometimes that is enough. Godwin wrote his report in a hand that had learned steel. Harcourt wrote his in a hand that had learned compromise. On the 7th night after the second engagement, as the ship slid through a field of milk with black seams in it, the aurora rose, a green whisper which intensified until all the sky seemed made of silk. Men, Englishmen who feared nothing but newness, took off their hats. It is difficult to be grandiose under such a map. Godwin stood under it and put his hand to his heart, as if swearing wordlessly. "We are small," he said, not to anyone. Harcourt heard him. Wren heard him. Collier, who had learned something of listening, heard him also. "We are," Wren said, "and yet here we are." Godwin smiled, which was a rarer weather than fair wind. "Yes, and there he is." He tilted his head north, where the Fury must be limping under a similar sky. They all turned, seeing nothing, and saw everything. Harcourt spoke without authority, and did not regret it. "Sir," he said, "when we go south, I will put in my report that this theatre cannot be left to the French. They will make a virtue of audacity, and put their flag on whatever the world refuses to own. We must make them share the danger." "Write that," Godwin said. "Make it elegant, so the men who have never felt cold think they have." Wren said, "You have a pen that lives on the other side of pain." Harcourt said, "It's the only one that writes in this weather." They laughed quietly, as men do when the alternative is shivering. There is an ending to every first part, and it always feels like a beginning one has missed by a day. They turned, eventually, to find water that would admit repairs more significant than was possible under the Aurora. The Valiant went with dignity. You cannot take that from a ship that has survived. Godwin did not sing, commanders do not. Wren, who had not slept properly in a fortnight, sat on a coil of rope and closed his eyes, and looked, with them closed, kinder than he could manage awake. Collier, his face stripped of its cockiness, leaned on a rail and let it take some of his weight. Harcourt walked the deck with his usual economy, and allowed himself once to put his hand on the transom where men put their hands when they pretend to reassure Wood and are secretly asking Wood to reassure them. "Mr. Harcourt," Godwin said at last. "Sir, we will see him again." Harcourt looked north. The sky had folded its silks away. The world was an iron bowl. Somewhere beyond it, LaRoche breathed. Between them lay water, ice, and the arithmetic of nations. "Yes, sir," Harcourt said. It was not obedience, it was prophecy. He lifted his face to the wind and tasted salt and something like snow and something like blood. He memorized the flavor against the day when he would need to recall it to make himself brave. From the private log of Lieutenant Samuel Harcourt, December 14th, 1807. The latitude no longer disputes itself. We limp with a pride that would be ridiculous if it were not earned. I find that war is a way of learning the value of adjectives. Necessary, that is a brave one. Glorious, I mistrust him, though he is charming. Bitter, a good, useful fellow. Northern, a word like a door that opens onto cold. I close this book today with an oath written where it cannot be read, that when called I will go north again. It is not wisdom, it is not madness. It is the habit of men who have been introduced to a certain horizon and wish to continue the conversation. Letter, never sent, to you. There will be a second part to this. It will not be ours alone to author. The ice and the wind and the French have votes. I hope you will read the next chapter with patience for the faults of the writer and kindness for the characters. If I return, I will learn your face again, as if it were a coastline. I intend to sail without charts. If I do not, I have left myself here and there in these pages, which is perhaps the most a man can ask of himself. Seicho, the Valiant's wake, narrow and earnest, drew a line across the cold. It did not point home but towards. Behind them the fog resumed its domestic chores and tidied away their argument with the French. Ahead, in the long distance, lay a shore that would let them hammer, caulk, mend, report, and sleep. Between, the indifferent sea made the same speech it has always made, and men, as they always have, answered back with wood and will and the names of their dead. And in a small cabin, lit by an oil lamp whose flame could be frustrated by the smallest draught, Samuel Harcourt tied a string about his logbook and put it in the drawer where he kept his patience. He blew out the lamp. He stood for a moment in a darkness as complete as snow. Then he went on deck, where the cold at least was honest, and he listened to the timbers whisper, and the rigging hum, and to the captain's footfall, and to the doctor's quiet cough, and to his own breath living in the air. He looked north, and did not imagine it kinder than it is. He looked north, and did not forgive it. He looked north, and loved it somewhat against his will. "Round two," he said under his breath. Not a boast, not a threat, a promise made to a country of ice. The wind, which hears more than it admits, took the words and did not keep them, because nothing keeps in such weather. The ship moved on. The horizon, miserly, generous, always the same, kept its distance, as all important things do.